Hi everybody, welcome to Inside Insider. I am so excited that I'm bringing to you the final part of my conversation with Don Roberto. In the first conversation I had with Don Roberto, it is about shamanism. And the second part is where he got personal and talked about how the spirit called him into shamanism. He also shared his ayahuasca experience, some of it being deeply healing, some of it deeply humbling. Now, if you haven't watched it, please find the link below and it will take you there. Also, remember to subscribe and click on the alert button so you always know when there is new content coming out. Now, in this third conversation is where we try and answer some difficult and hard question about shamanism. So, without much further delay, let's get to it.
Kano abano, Ramakano abano, Hakon Shaman akinra, Senim para mayon Shaman kin, Medicina maketai,
That's
Tonira.
beautiful. So there is a lot of mystery surrounding shamanism, and very often when we think about shamanism, we think about the ceremonies, we think about ayahuasca, and then there is often the conversation about be careful, you may have a bad trip, or be careful, you may be overdosing on the medicine. Um, I like your perspective on this. I like you to demystify it or give it some more clarity.
Okay, so what's really important is that those words those phrases you've just used, bad trip or et cetera, they come from, they're referenced or they're rooted from drug culture. And so the most important thing to realize is that when we're working with ayahuasca, we're not necessarily taking a chemical substance that's going to transform our consciousness, but instead we're actually working with an intelligence, an awareness that once you drink this, it looks inside you, it looks deep inside you. And for that consciousness, it's not limited to 3 dimensions. It's not limited to the immediate time and space. It can see way, way, way beyond, right down to your ancestors, right down to where you are, all the nooks and crannies of your life, even to what you could be. And so it's, if you approach it because you want healing and transformation and personal growth, then it's going to make a decision on your behalf, working together with you to say, what does Teresa need? Okay, what does she really need in order to grow? It might be that you need to let go of certain kind of patterns of thought or imprints of previous experiences, or it may be, it may be something more challenging, for example. And although that may be a tough thing, it's not necessarily a bad trip. It's a journey to face the things you need to face to let them go. So bad trip basically means a drug experience that's gone wrong, or it's confrontative, but not in a positive way. If tough things happen, if challenges emerge, if darker things are presented, it's not necessarily because you've done anything wrong or the medicine wants to punish you. It's in order to facilitate your growth. So there's the intelligence that's primary to ensuring that this is in your ultimate best interest and your highest growth experience.
I also want to talk a bit about the legality of administering ayahuasca. I'd like to have some insight about that. Why did so many countries not legalize it yet?
Let me give you the experience of Brazil. So Brazil found itself in a position where in 1971, the Americans basically, pushing through the United Nations, had created a convention on the use of psychotropic substances. The political motivation behind that was to kind of shut down any kind of mind expansion or any kind of questioning using mind-altering substances, because they'd also been through the whole Vietnam War, and a whole generation had turned against the establishment because it started to question. So they wanted to protect the establishment by creating this kind of legal framework, and in that process they wanted to get the whole world signed up for this as well. And so they pushed for that. And certain countries like Peru and Ecuador just said, and Colombia said, no, I'm sorry. Part of this convention banning things includes ayahuasca, and ayahuasca is a traditional medicine. It's part of our heritage. We cannot, ban our heritage. It's just not possible. Brazil was on the fence. Because they actually had people who were taking the medicine in a very ritualistic way within churches that were kind of Christian and African, a little bit of a syncretic movement there. And they were taking the ayahuasca as a sacrament to connect them to the transcendent. And these people were not kind of street hoodlums or gangsters or criminals. They were your run-of-the-mill, middle class, accountants, lawyers, all that kind of level of kind of demographic. And so the politicians had to face the question of like, what do we do with this? You know, do we criminalize these otherwise upstanding members of society? And they said to themselves, let's make policy based on science. And they said, look, we can only ban this if there's physical danger, or it impacts us medically, or it's got some kind of a social impact that's negative, right? And so they did a longitudinal study over 10 years, and they had control groups, people who didn't drink and people who did. And that they found a couple of very interesting things. First, there's no physical harm if you take it over a period of time. So there's no medical reason to ban it. But secondly, they found two main things. Those people who drank ayahuasca compared to the control group were cognitively enhanced. In layman's language, it meant that they were smarter than the average person who didn't drink ayahuasca. If you drink ayahuasca over a long period of time, it actually enhances your cognition. This is sometimes I've come out of a session and it feels like everything's been turbocharged, that, you know, I'm working on a whole different level. And it might be simply because there's been some pruning, some neurological pruning, getting rid of stuff that is not necessarily, you know, needed, but it's burdensome. But the final discovery of the Brazilian study was that the participants who drank medicine over a long period of time were more engaged in community, more engaged in society. They weren't dropouts, they weren't selfish, they were actually productive. And so the Brazilian government said to themselves, we cannot ban this, we cannot make this illegal, because we don't have any real tangible evidence that it's medically harmful or socially destructive. And so it got passed into law. So other countries are not quite up to speed, or don't formulate policy based on science like that. But what's happening is that you can find ceremonies all throughout the world because people want to know. They want to experience. Sometimes they're hungry for the transcendent. Sometimes they're hungry for this catalyst of an experience that transforms them in a much quicker time frame than normal. Some people say that drinking ayahuasca, one evening of ayahuasca, is like 10 years of therapy, because so much happens within those 5 hours that it's impossible to articulate the actual levels and changes that can occur, but they do.
So could you share a little, like, why would anybody feel a calling to want to do ayahuasca?
It's a very powerful modality for profound change at levels that really would take perhaps many years to achieve, if that, and in a very direct way. So when I talk to my clients, I explain it like this, that we're each a collection of stories that help to create an identity. And yet sometimes as we grow, those stories become a little anachronistic, that they no longer serve us. They're old stories, they're no longer representative of who we are or who we potentially could become. Instead of defining us, they begin to limit us. They begin to serve as our kind of psychological jail. And so what's beautiful about ayahuasca is that it can identify what doesn't serve us, but really what we can afford to let go of in order to promote our growth. So we can let go of these stories, and we can allow ourselves to express quantum possibilities of who we truly are within, rather than being tightly defined by this is who my parents expected me to be, or what society expected me to be, or even what I think I am. Because we're often much, 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 much more than what we imagine ourselves to be. And we're limited by imagination. So sometimes this encounter with this numinous being, this intelligence, this deep intelligence, allows us to update and transform the potential that we carry within us to be able to manifest our highest potential, essentially. So that's really what it is in a nutshell. Why should anybody do this? Because it allows deep healing to occur that sometimes we have no idea even how to get leverage on, or traction on. But the medicine knows, it can see within us. It's clear as day because the plants have been here for 500 million years and they know a thing or two about consciousness. So we've only been here for 2 million, according to scientists, 6,000 if you're a religious person. So, so the plants know quite a lot about consciousness and how to heal it and transform it.
Is there certain people who should avoid ayahuasca and shouldn't take ayahuasca?
Okay, on a very basic level, those people who have recognized heart issues shouldn't participate, because it does accelerate the heartbeat. It does put pressure on the cardiovascular system. If you're taking antidepressants, the person who takes that has to remove them out of the system at least 6 months before they drink. The reason being is that the interaction and biochemical interaction of brain chemistry is very dangerous. So we say that there's an absolute rule: nobody who's taking antidepressants can participate, for their own safety and for the safety of other people around them. The other thing is, people with recognized mental issues like psychosis or schizophrenia, they cannot participate. Why? Because the ayahuasca experience is very disintegrative. In order to reformat or reconstruct, it has to break down sense of reality, or the maps, or whatever you like. And unless you have a fairly stable sense of reality, it's not worth going there, because it's going to become too fragmented, and then there's no possibility to integrate those experiences. Right? You have to have a fairly strong sense of who you are. So the difference between a mad person and a shaman is that they go to the same territories, they explore the same realms, but the mad person doesn't necessarily know how to come back to 3D or to reality. They get stuck in those kind of crazy spaces. But whereas the shaman, they know how to go and they know how to come back. And it's a very kind of normal, practical thing. So there's a big difference. So a person who's actually with the potential of having psychosis or schizophrenia, the danger is that they get lost in those spaces and never come back. Whereas it might just be latent and they're kind of coping okay with reality, but the ayahuasca experience could tip them over into a whole different level of chaos and disequilibrium. Does that make sense?
When a child, when they were growing up, they couldn't differentiate between a psychic experience versus a mental psychosis experience. And there are some saying that when a person is actually going through some psychic experience, if nobody actually knows how to bring that back, they will misunderstand that to be a mental disorder. From your experience, have you come across anything like this?
I actually did come across that specifically in when I went to the east coast of Taiwan and spent some time with the Aboriginals there. And there was a young girl of 14 years old, and she was beginning to have this kind of calling, the spirit's calling, because ancestrally the Aboriginal tribes in Taiwan had shamanic practices before they were Christianized. And so the spirits were calling her, the ancestors were calling her to follow the path. So, but because the mother was so heavily Christianized and was within that framework, there was no space for her to recognize that this may be the ancestors. This was basically demonic or psychotic. That was the options available to her. And so if that young girl had been able to have had some mentorship and had been able to be guided into exploring these spaces safely with guidance, then she may have been able to navigate it successfully and integrate all those experiences healthily. But I think the mother made the choice to medicalize the child, and so the child is basically confined to this diagnosis for the rest of her life, which is very harmful, I think. So that's an example of how, without the right framework, those experiences can be misinterpreted. I do know somebody who is not Aboriginal but Western, a South African lady, who is had all these visions coming to her, that, in the sense that the realms were calling her, or the spirits were calling to her, and she actually had to medicate herself for 14 years with antidepressants in order just to kind of navigate reality successfully, until she discovered the training program that took those talents and those skills and those abilities and channeled them so that she could be the mistress of her abilities, rather than being overwhelmed by the visions and the callings and all that. So that was it was a lifesaver, because she was half a person with all these medication that were drugging her, essentially.
Yeah, totally.
So,
Wow. So where can people find you? You have been so helpful and so insightful. If people want to work with you, where can they find you?
Well, we travel. I travel all over the world in most of the continents, so I am accessible. You just have to drop me an email at spiritoftheamazon@gmail.com, and I'll put you in the mailing list. And essentially, we're in we're in lockdown right now. The whole planet is unable to move, but that will change over time, and things will pick up, and a new normality will emerge. So I hope in the not too distant future that we'll be able to meet. Also, I hold regular events within Peru to work with my own teachers, and that is a journey and adventure of a lifetime. So I do recommend that people reach out at spiritoftheamazon@gmail.com and contact me.
Thank you so much, Don Roberto. It is such a pleasure having you here. And thank you for sharing all this information so generously, no holes barred. I know that people really welcome this information. Thank you so much.
I hope so. Thank you so much too. Thank you, Teresa.
Medicina maketai, maketai toniram. Medicina maketai, maketai toniram. Sitting para mayon shaman king. Hey.